This is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow water body that connects the Persian Gulf to the rest of the world, carrying critical exports like oil. If the Strait of Hormuz is compromised, the global economy could be knocked onto its knees. Alexander Wood, CEO of strategy consulting and corporate advisory firm AWR Lloyd, explains that the Strait of Hormuz is a vastly overlooked vulnerability.
Well, I think most people actually have little sense of how important the Strait of Hormuz is to the world, both economically and politically. It's by far the world's biggest energy choke point. A third of the world's seaborne oil and a quarter of the world's LNG trade transits the strait every day. The economies of the Gulf countries in the Middle East are still heavily dependent on this oil and gas trade. And if you look at Asian economies, in turn, they rely on the Gulf for towards 60% of their crude requirements and an even greater proportion of LNG import needs. So I think you can say that there's a kind of economic umbilical cord between the Middle East and Asia.
Sam Olson, author of the newsletter What China Wants, and co-founder of the strategic consultancy Metis Asia, emphasizes that alongside oil and gas, the export of other critical resources is dependent on safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz.
The Middle East is still a major exporter of oil, and it will be for the foreseeable future. But in recent years, the Middle East has been trying to diversify, especially in its attempts to plan for a post-carbon future. And that does include lots of new energy sources around the renewable sectors. But in the meantime, they're taking advantage of the cheap energy that their plentiful oil provides to subsidize production of a number of different types of chemicals, for example, petrochemicals, but also metal products, which are normally a high energy intensity to make, for example, aluminium and wire cables and the like.
One key new resource is blue ammonia.
Blue ammonia is really exciting as a future new fuel source. Basically, it's a byproduct that's created from fossil fuel production right now. But one of the advantages is that it can be used in existing power stations, and it does not give off carbon dioxide when it's burned.
However, geopolitical tensions in the region are simmering, and the US's assassination of Qasem Soleimani last year highlighted American interests in the region and weakened its ties with Tehran.
In terms of what Washington wants, it's very likely that for the foreseeable future, Washington will continue to pile pressure onto Tehran simply because they do not trust Iran not to try and keep trying to become a nuclear power, which would be very bad for regional balance and something that America has already said it will not stand for.
Another global superpower, China, has largely stayed away from Middle East politics, until now. China's economic rise and rising energy needs have led Beijing to forge relationships with energy providers around the world, including, of course, Tehran.
In recent months, Iran and China have signed a $400 billion 25-year deal, which will see in exchange for cheap oil, Beijing give Tehran a lot of military and economic support to help it get over the long-term sanctions that America has been putting onto Iran. China taking more interest in the Strait because of its energy security worries means that it is very likely that there will be more and more tension across the region, in particular at that choke point in the years to come.
In the case of tension or conflict, Iran will not back down.
The Iranian government has been very clear for a very long time now that if it's pushed too far, it will take action to block the strait. And as we all know, the Middle East is a giant geopolitical powder keg, and serious blockage to the Strait of Hormuz could really light a fuse that leads to an almighty geopolitical explosion that I think none of us want to imagine.
In the likely case of a closure of the strait, only the best prepared will survive.
One solution which AWR Lloyd is working on with its clients is the development of an underground rock cavern oil storage facility about halfway down the Indian Ocean coast in Oman. And underground storage has a number of major advantages. It's a great deal cheaper to build than tank storage. It's also cheaper to operate. But most important of all is that it's environmentally much less hazardous than steel tank storage and much less vulnerable to potential terrorist or military attacks.